I shall make an accompanied site inspection later on in the day. I would like to avoid thunderstorms, so I think looking at the weather forecast, early afternoon might be the best time to go. I would need to be accompanied by both parties on the site visit. Later on, I will be inviting discussion on what conditions might be appropriate if I allow the appeal. This does not indicate any prejudging of the case. It's standard procedure. I have an application for costs by the appellant, and I've today received the council's response to that application. The appellant will have an opportunity to have final comments on that cost application and the council's response. I've also received today an application for costs from Mrs. Johnson. And that is an application against the council and Carter Construction Limited. Copies of that, I understand, have been given to both parties, and I'll return to this matter later on today for the parties to comment on that application. I have a signed statement of common ground which sets out the matters which have been agreed between the council and the appellant. This states that the planning board of the council remains dissatisfied with the contamination issue, but will not be calling a witness or contesting the appeal. Interested parties also object to the proposal on the grounds of contamination. I consider that the main issue in the appeal is whether or not the information submitted in respect of ground investigations is sufficient to demonstrate that the site is suitable for residential development. I've prepared an agenda for our discussion and wish to explore this topic first before discussing other matters. Do the parties have any comments on this? Mr. Donnelly.
No, I'm happy with the agenda, sir.
I shall invite particular people to contribute to the discussion at particular times, but I would welcome comments from all of you as the discussion progresses. This is an informal process. It's not a public meeting, but it's an informal discussion. There won't be any formal presentation of cases or cross-examination. The appellant will have the opportunity of having the final say. Okay. Can I just first of all just establish the relevant planning policies? There's policies of the Amber Valley Local Plan 2006, policies EN1 and H5 state that they restrict development outside the settlement limits, and this site is outside a settlement limit, but my understanding is that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. Could the council confirm that?
Yes, we can't. At present it stands as 3.33 years as of the 1st of April 2017.
And there's a number of other policies which have been referred to in the council's report, which are relevant to the various aspects of the development. Okay, can I just move on to the first main item on the agenda, then, please? It's the history of the site. Now, from reading through the submissions, I understand that the site was historically a clay pit and then subsequently an open cast coal mine. And the adjacent land to the north, which is referred to as LSO1, was licensed for landfill of hazardous waste. And then to the east and northeast, there are other former landfill sites, which are known as Summercoats LOM and Deep Hard Open Cast. I understand that the latter two were tipped before the licensing requirements came into force in the 1970s. But first of all, I'll appreciate some information, if anything is known about what material was tipped on Summercoats LOM and Deep Hard Open Cast. Yes, sir.
It was previously a sports ground report. It was a sports ground, you know, with a cricket field, golf and everything. That was the previous, before all the way it's got.
Okay.
And it was immaculately maintained.
I can't understand why that's what it is.
And that is significant.
So this is the appeal site itself. Yeah. And this is before waste started being tipped on there. This is before it was a clay pit.
Yes.
Yeah. Is anything known about what was tipped on Summercoats LOM and Deep Hard Open Cast? Are there any records?
I don't think there's anything that's actually recorded that's been tipped there, but it's, I mean, local people have always stated, you know, that there were nighttime tipping. This was obviously subject to the Smugfly Open Cast proposals, and this area was removed, although I know the Rugby itself wasn't part of those proposals. But yeah, definitely local people have always stated that it was tipped at night time illegally.
Does the panel have any information on?
In terms of the destiny, one of the things we did was go to the BGS records office in Plymouth to have a look at the records that they had. There are quite a lot of old warhol records for the areas around the site, which were included in the destiny. And there is evidence of quite deep main ground in one of those areas. Some of them did, one of the drillers logs did signs of contamination in those areas. So yeah, there are old records that need to be investigated.
You should have the records.
Can I just say as well, some of those boreholes are not actually for public viewing, some of the boreholes that were done for the Smugfly groundwater project.
Would it be possible to present some evidence, sir, that's relevant to that comment?
Yes, yes. Have you got copies for?
These are for you, sir.
Well, copies need to be given to the appellant and the.
Do you want to see them all?
Well, so the site that's known as Smotherfly then, is that part of the Summercoats LOM and Deep Hard Open
Yes,
Cast?
it is, yes. So it's the whole area of LSO1, the farmland to the side, and it sort of borders the northern edge of the Rugby Club and then around the edge. So is that all of the other Deep Hard Open Cast LOM, LSO1, and the farmland, that the Rugby Club was the boundary, it was the division between those two areas.
But what is incredibly significant is, because Smotherfly was a large open cast licence mine, it's interesting that when you go do the site visit today, where the Rugby Club is, that looks over Smotherfly C, which was the first coal to be extracted, which is at the Pye Bridge end. They then did B, but they never did A. And in A is 1.65 million tonnes of coal that they are not going to extract.
There are some records for the LS41. There's a licence which says it was able to accept a certain amount of difficult waste, and there are records as to that it was accepting material from the National Smokers Fuel and Coalite plants, including thiocyanate. So I don't think it's disputed that the LS01 site to the north is a hazardous waste site. And I don't think it's disputed that the Summercoats LOM landfill was also a hazardous waste site. They did accept hazardous waste. Whether there are records of exactly what they took like today, that's not the point. They are hazardous waste.
But what is
As
also,
defined now.
but what is also very significant is the former scientific officer for Amber Valley Borough Council, Darren Hurst, when he was questioned about the TLA, the three-letter acronym of LOM, he didn't even know what it stood for, what it meant. Now, everyone supposes it means large open cast mine, but that potentially is in doubt. And also, it should be noted, under licence from Derbyshire County Council, there's a significant list of items that were tipped in massive quantities, things like asbestos, things like vanadium, and the thing that's significant about vanadium is it's slightly radioactive. So to a lot of people who know about waste, as soon as that goes on that list, that's significant.
Is this on LSO1?
To be fair, sir, it gets confusing because of LS41, LOM, and LSO1. I think we're all agreed that in LSO1 there's lots of things that shouldn't be in there, but we also think it's leached into LS41 as well. Because when you see the topography and the geography of the ground, it's the higher made ground where it's basically leaching off.
Okay, can I give the appellant a chance to reply on those?
Thank you, sir. I think we can come on to those points when we move on to the next points on the
Okay.
agenda in terms of the evidence that is available in relation to those issues.
Okay. I mean, at the moment, I'm just sort of just exploring the general history of the site and the area. I'd like clarification, please, of the licenses for LSO1 and LS41 included difficult waste. Well, could someone explain what difficult waste was?
For LS01, like it's been stated, is indicated to be a hazardous waste tip, so there was quite a lot of different types of waste deposited in that area. Asbestos has been mentioned, a lot of different types of waste in that area. For LS41, the licence relates to fine entities.
I mean, to be fair, sir, there's actually, it's identified as 65 tonnes of toxic metal compounds. This is per day, 6 days a week for a year.
Look, this is LSO1 we're talking about.
This is LSO1, yes.
Yeah, but well, for LS41, what would have been difficult waste there?
LS41 basically provided with positive inert industrial waste, including construction, demolition waste, industrial non-hazardous waste, and scrap rubber, including tyres. So they were the waste that listed as being deposited in that licence.
I think that's the other way around, sir. I think that's actually the description for LSO1 on the other side of the hill. I don't think that's the description of LS41.
I think it is. That is LS41, and that is the licence for LS41.
But with all due respect, you've said on record that LSO1 was never tipped, the extension cell.
No.
Can I just remind you that this is this is not a public meeting, so we will come on to all the matters. We just need to do it in a logical order.
You wanted to know what difficult waste is.
Yes.
Difficult waste, the definition is really difficult to handle waste.
Right.
So they're wet waste, they're greases, they're fuels, they're sludges. That's what they mean by difficult. They don't mean it's it's got nothing to do with contamination status. It's more to do with how it's to be handled. In the licence, it talks about taking difficult waste, substantial quantity of highly mixed toxic waste, 105 tonnes of sludges, fuels and greases, 3 tonnes of which were difficult waste. So those more contaminated sludge waste. That's what they mean.
But for clarity, that's LSO1.
Has council ever defined any land in the area as being contaminated under the Environmental Protection Act? No. I understand there's a public inquiry, there's reference to a public inquiry having been made in 1981 about alleged disposal of dioxins. Is there any information available about that, or is the outcome of the inquiry known?
Well, I think so. I think the significant part of that is that was for the open cast, small fly open cast coal application, which the Secretary of State admitted Sector A of the open cast which was 1.6, wasn't it?
1.65.
1.65 million tonnes of coal. And I think the wording was that it stated was so little is known about the potential dioxin from the coal-like plant. That this area should remain untouched. I think if they're going to refuse, if British Coal are going to refuse for that amount of coal to stay in the ground, when they were probably a company that could have dealt with remediation of the site, I think that's quite significant.
And it's also very significant that when the National Coal Board did the boreholes, borehole number 5 and borehole number 8 were full of dioxin. Now obviously dioxin is not naturally occurring in the environment, and also LQN have verified on the Rugby Club site there's dioxin. Now it seems strange that something that's not naturally occurring is available and found on a site. It's very strange.
Actually, the site was drilled properly at the time of the open cast application by drill shore. Records of this, as a lot of the records mysteriously disappeared. There's also the other thing is that the site was gifted to the local people from either James Oaks and Company or from Stanton Staley. Now the other significant thing I think is how is it that the Borough Council have managed to sell that site to a construction company, David Ashley Construction, when it was gifted to the people of that area. But there again, significantly, the deeds, the documents have all gone missing. You know, that's very questionable, I think. And you know, we're here today because the land has been sold when it was gifted to the people of Lower Somercotes and Five Ridge. Now, can the Borough Council explain what sequence of events led to that? Because I think the local people deserve an explanation of that.
Yes, yeah.
The licence for the open cast coal is an outside, so that's not relevant. So outside. And dioxins which have been mentioned, which we haven't counted locally on site, can occur from natural sources. It can occur from a variety of sources like burning coal, wood and diesel. Actually occurs atmospherically as well, but also is an industrial contaminant as well. So I wouldn't deny that it can be industrial contaminant, but it isn't solely industrial. It does occur at low levels in the environment across the UK.
I think the significance is that they found a marker dioxin. Whilst it might be true that dioxins themselves can be naturally occurring, they are a large suite of chemicals, because the marker dioxin that was found, that is the issue. The marker dioxin was not only found in shallow soils, but it was found in deep soils. And I think it is not disputed that that marker dioxin is associated with particular chemicals that were made at Camstar, and that the Camstar demolition waste went to sites that were unknown locations. So there is some significance there, and there was quite a lot of investigation done around that because it was seen that it was significant. So I don't think you can dismiss, I don't think it's now useful to say dismiss and say, oh well, it's not significant. Because this particular marker compound is not naturally occurring. It was found at deep levels. It wasn't found across the site, across the area. It was found in specific places, and it is associated with particular chemical made at a particular place. And there are records of that. With that site had an explosion. That explosive waste was dumped in sites of unknown. And it ties in with the idea that there was illegal dumping done at this site in the at night. So there is. It's not proof positive, but there's certainly a smoking gun there.
We can just respond to that.
Yes.
There's two issues there, I suppose. One, that the chronology of coal-light isn't quite keeping with the position of our site, I think.
Camstar.
Sorry, yes, 68, yeah. We're not sort of saying we haven't found them, they are there. That the types of waste the licence allows to accept industrial wastes, the two could potentially be correlated together. If industrial waste, you might have lots of point of note is that the assessment, it all comes down to risk assessment ultimately. Levels on the ground will be accounted such that they don't pose a risk if you adopt suitable human rights.
Yeah, well, that comes on to the whole point of this whole meeting. Which is the primary question is, has enough investigation been done to answer that question?
I think before we come on to that,
Can I just say something?
Yes.
We can't hear that.
Can I ask?
I think it did actually. People stood up and speak.
Yeah, is the microphone? Is it definitely not working?
I think it might have died, sir. Again.
Just again talking about dioxins, one of the main observations in Stephen's report, also we're aware of, is that dioxins are relatively mobile and they don't dissolve immobile and don't dissolve readily in water. They basically dissolve in fat. So whilst we've got low levels on the site, the levels that we found, which are only locally present, are below appropriate risk screening thresholds. And it isn't really a mechanism whereby those dioxins can mobilise and migrate, because they don't mobilise in water, and therefore we do not consider that they are likely to be significantly mobilised or moved around the site, because by their very nature they do not dissolve in water.
Okay. I think we're moving on to looking at the results of the investigation. I was really just concerned at this stage with just the general history of the site, and what's happened in the past, and what records we have.
Can I just say something? The photographs that we submitted with our statement to case, I believe, were taken in 1968, and they clearly show LSO1 in operation at the time, and they clearly show the earth movers moving down onto the left hand, so the eastern, western end of the development site. So at that time, in 1968, they were excavating on the end closest to Norman Road.
I think what's also significant, sir.
Sorry, can I just clarify which appendix was that?
One sec. Not very organised. Not remember.
I mean, there are photographic evidence of this, sir, and there are pictures of how the sports ground was basically cut in half, and there are pictures of the earth moving. I mean, the scale of it is absolutely incredible. It's mind-boggling to think how much was tipped during the day and illegally at night. But the thing about dioxin that's incredibly significant is that Monsanto Chemicals, via a subcontract for the Vietnam War, were making Agent Orange in Derbyshire, and Agent Orange has a particular dioxin in it which is lethal to all forms of life, and we believe that that subset of dioxin has been illegally tipped on this site. And what I also might add, we also believe that there are significant amounts of radioactive isotopes tied in with Rolls-Royce Hills Quarry Derby and other isotopes as well. Nobody knows how these things mix in the ground, and everybody knows all the bad stuff was tipped at night under the cover of darkness.
I have got it now. It's Appendix U, and I've actually got here. Each one shows an aerial shot of the entire area, which must have been taken between 1968 and 1971, because LOM is in operation at the time. The sports ground only covered half of the proposed development site, and the other half is obviously in operation from the photograph.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And against there, I think we're moving on to other issues, but again, like Mr. Smith said, these assertions.
If you refer to Darren Hurst's former report about the suspicion of the alleged radioactive isotopes, the fact that you didn't do the drilling properly and look in the right places, perhaps you didn't find them, whereas perhaps other people have done it and thought, oh, this is a bit dodgy, we're not going to continue. So I think whatever happens, we need to have more drilling done properly by an independent contractor, and done properly with the proper equipment.
Again,
I think this is another future item on the agenda.
You were asking about evidence. There really is only one piece of evidence, or one piece of record relating to a hazardous waste cell within LS41. And that comes from the minutes of a Derbyshire County Council meeting, which says that there was photographs taken in 1977 showing the open void in this area being filled with empty and or part empty 45-gallon drums, a fair amount of tarry substance in the base of the pit. There was no clay lining specifically and no records of depth along this although the application plans accompanying the application by Cambro dated the scheme was generally 35 feet, tipping depth below 20 feet, cover depth of inner fill. So there is some records in the council that there was this cell, there's no records exactly where it was in the lower part, the southern part of LS41, and that material being tipped into it was this material to be requested from Cambro to take all this sort of waste tarry material. There was a problem with that at that time, and that material was being emptied out of 45-gallon drums into the base of the tip.
Okay, and I have one.
detailed response to that research.
Okay, yes, yes.
That working? Yes. We've looked into this in quite considerable depth. We've gone through the chronology of Stephen's report. Basically, it's asserted that the waste was being tipped in the extension cell to LSO1 in 1977, and that the photo appended relates to that cell.
No, I didn't search for what pages related to that.
Sorry?
I didn't have any photos related to that.
Okay, well, Karen, anyway then. We've looked into this in great detail. The application for the LSO1 extension cell didn't happen until June 1978. The licence was granted in September 19th, 1978. The licence expired on September 30th, 1978, in tandem with the licence for LSO1 in general. We have a pack that we handed round. First of all, you have the licence as it relates to LSO1. If you look through that, which talks about the waste that has been deposited, there was also there's been a suggestion that waste is being tipped from drums into the cell on LSO1, which is suggested to be in our site. If we go to the 4th page back, picture 2, which was submitted by some Case Against Development, it shows a picture saying LSO1 whilst in operation. This is, as we understand it, the photo that's alluded to in terms of the drums being tipped into an unlined cell. We've had a look at the first, as we discussed in terms of chronology. This is 1977. In 1977, the licence hadn't been applied for. Secondly, we've looked at the photograph itself. The view from the photo, from the foreground to the background, shows the land falling down towards some houses. Our site, along the B600, topographically rises towards the west by about 6 metres, where the land falls in this photo. So the dates don't match, the topography doesn't appear to match, and if you turn over this black and white photo and look at the adjacent colour photos, what we've done, or client's done, Rodger Carter, is had some photos taken of a site which is adjacent to Smotherfly, which is about 500 metres to the north of our site, at the northern tip of LSO1. If you look at the photos, there are we looked at about 8 or 9 similarities. there's a gable end of a building facing the cell, and then a block of terraced houses behind that. There's a stream running in front of that gable end, and then there is a road, which is a tree-lined road running off to the northeast. There's a farm field to the centre, and the farm field has a break in it, and we've taken some photos to show that the picture taken in 1977 actually appears to relate to the northernmost tip of LS01. It doesn't at all relate to our cell, LS01, if indeed that's constructed within LS41.
How do you
Can
explain
I
that?
make a comment there? Clearly says on our photograph, the historic photograph, that is a picture of LS01. We're not disputing that at all.
What was
Just
just
as
suggested,
Ryan never took any photographs with him.
what was just suggested is that the council minutes from 1990 suggest that the cell was being tipped in 1977, and it was just suggested that that cell was in our site. And what we're showing here is this photo with drums in it is not our site.
We know that. I've not said it is.
Mr. Fry alluded to that.
One that I don't. If I'd have thought that was a photograph, I would have included it. I don't think that's a photograph. I don't think there are any. I don't think the photograph alluded to in the council minutes.
But what's more
Is
significant?
record. Hang on. Second point is that these minutes were made in 1990. The only reason to bring this up is to say that there were some records. I don't think the fact that it says 1977, 1978 is significant. It was made in 1990. It suggests that a cell LS01 was on the site. If that was not the case, if you did not believe that to be the case, then you spent an inordinate amount of time and effort trying to find it. If you do not believe it was there, I do not understand why you did the investigation. All I was doing with this background was putting in the record that there was some record of it existing, that was in a council minute, that led on to further investigations, or should have led on to further investigations, that there may have been hazardous material on the site.
But with all due respect, this document fails on page 2 because it's a different planning application. And quite clearly, the one that's already been submitted to the inspector, they were tipping on Saturdays, where clearly on this document they weren't tipping on Saturdays. So this is a different plan application.
And LS41 was still tipping in 79, so that isn't correct.
We haven't said LS01, sorry,
LS41 was still tipping in 79.
Yes, but LS01 expired in September 30th, 1978. I just want to respond to Stephen's commentary. He's looking at his submission, he has put here, the importance of this line of evidence is that the new cell for LS01 was created to accept hazardous waste by Cambro, was recorded as having been physically present on site and being actively tipped in 1977 within a Derbyshire County Council minute from June 1990. The states the cell was located in the southern part of the Summer Coast landfills and being worked east to west. Then he goes on to say, that in photographs taken in 1977 show the cell as open void in this area being filled with empty and part empty 45-gallon drums and a fair amount of tarry substances. There was no clay lining specifically and no record of depths, although for application plans accompanying application by Cambro, the scheme showed generally 35-foot tipping depth with a 20-foot cover. The main 2 points of significance of the above record by Derbyshire County Council are that, although the exact location of the later LS01 cell is not known, it was most likely located in the southern part of the Summer Coast landfill, beneath the area of the site at a depth of between 6 to 8 metres, with 6 metres of inert cover. So, in that statement, it's clearly identifying that the 1977 records relate to our cell. Just to respond to the further comment, the reason our client spent a lot of money investigating this matter is because, we'll go through our presentation, we took the concerns of the public very seriously, and we reviewed the information with Darren Hurst, who's no longer with the council, and in reviewing that work, we designed a scope of works to address those concerns, and those were phased works, and we can come back to that. But the reason that work was undertaken it was necessary to investigate the concerns, and those works have been undertaken.
Well, there was a licence from Canberra on the 30th of December 1977.
There was.
You're saying that's not your licence. You're saying the photographs do not relate to your site. I'm saying, okay, the photograph might not relate to your site, but there was a photographic record, there was a minute, there was something that says it was towards the southern part of the Summer Coast landfill, and that is the only evidence, the only evidence, the only record of of anything to do with this. You investigated it, so you must have given it some credence. If you didn't want to give it credence, then you should.
We gave it appropriate credence, we need to investigate it to address it.
Fine, then you gave it credence.
We gave it, as it was suggested as a concern, it was targeted for investigation. That's correct. Right.
Can I just make clear that Canberra do have a documented history of illegal tipping. They was brought to court for it, I think that was during the 80s. And let's face it, all this, we're not going to find a document that said that illegal tipping took place because it took place secretly.
At night, under the cover of darkness.
You're never going to find a document that states that. But local people saw it regularly going on. I lived down there, I can remember them tipping, I can remember them tipping all sorts of stuff. There was no security on site, there was virtually no fencing up at all. You know.
Okay, where, from local residents' memories then, where exactly did that tipping, how did the lorries get into the site, where did they go?
The lorries got into the site through Norman Road, they also got in down Cockshut Lane at the very bottom of LSO1, and they could also access from opposite the industrial estate. Prior to that time, Deepard Open Cast was tipped by rail. That came in off the main railway line, so maybe that came in direct from the coalite plant. I don't know whether there is a link to the coalite plant or was, but that did come in by rail to Deepard Open Cast.
So, the truth of it is, the site was unsecure. The site manager said he wasn't there at night. People were coming in and going out. Allegedly, one night there was like 15 lorries queuing up to tip under the cover of darkness.
What we've also got to remember is in that little valley, it was a vast industrial area at that time. You've got Kempston's Chemical Works, you've got pits within 2 miles everywhere of you. You've got the foundry, you've got the gas works, you've got the pipe works. It was just a vast industrial site. It would have been accepting everything. There was no restrictions before 72, 73. There'd be everything in there.
So are you talking about, this happened in, when did it happen exactly?
What are you referring to?
You know, the illegal tipping.
Mr. Marriott's letter, which you've got a copy of, clearly outlines his complaint to Amber Valley Borough Council that was ignored. He viewed it on regular occasions. We believe, and he's not the only one, there's another statement about tipping at night. We believe they tipped at night for a whole year. So under the cover of darkness, they were tipping on an industrial scale.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I will have Mr. Marriott's letter on file, but
I mean, with all due respect, sir, to call the fire brigade out because this material that's been tipped is glowing, and the fire brigade turns and says we can't put water on it, we don't know what it is, and then there's contractors appear at dawn and backfill and cover it. So it's there, sir, in the record.
Again, sir, I think Mr. Smith made pertinent on that alleged. It's the question of evidence and demonstration. Again, the technical investigations that have been undertaken in great detail to establish that fact. We'll go on to talk about it.
Could I just briefly mention that?
The elements of supposition.
Just briefly mention for the open cast application, British Coal, they did a proper in-site investigation. Bear in mind, those holes are 180 feet deep. They drilled them sites properly, and they must have submitted the proper information, and they was denied the planning permission of 1.6 million 5 tonnes of coal. I think that's really significant, the 1988 inquiry.
2 Secretaries of State for the Environment have intervened independently and denied any planning or development on the site. And I think, to be fair to the experts, I think to be fair to the experts, the rule at GCHQ is if 3 people independently say the same thing, it's probably true. So if people are taking the effort to write in and complain, they're not making it up.
okay, is there anything else then generally on the history of the site and the area before we go on to the details of the investigations that have been undertaken?
I think one of the things that's really significant is when you look at the black and white picture of that beautiful sports and social facility, you know, the time and effort that went into produce those bowling greens, the tennis courts, the cricket pitches, and that massive industrial scar across it, they only agreed because it was said it would be remediated to what it was. It transpired into a single pitch rugby club. It's incredible.
And where did Amber Valley Borough Council come to own it? That's quite a serious question.
can we move on please to site investigations that have been undertaken? Firstly, I'd just like to examine the possibility of any pathways for contaminants from between site LSO1 and the other adjacent sites onto the appeal site. Firstly, I'd just like to establish the boreholes that have been carried out, the boreholes that have been undertaken for this appeal site. Now, I understand that the appellants have carried out, applied geology. I understand they did a limited number of boreholes initially, and then Geodyne have carried out further borehole investigations. Could you please just take us through that?
Yes, I think the best thing to do at this stage is I've got a chronology of the work that's been undertaken. I think it's probably better to explain what's been undertaken and then deal with any detailed questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
So, Geodyne first became involved with the site during December 2014. The first element of our works was to visit the data room at Amber Valley Borough Council and review the relevant information the AVBC retained for the site. This included a review of anonymous information provided by members of the public. A total of 59 documents were reviewed. Some of the reviewed documents are included in the subcoating and development submission, and also included within our desk study report. As part of the initial liaison with Amber Valley, we were supplied with a copy of the council's response to the submission to the applied geology report as part of the planning application at that time. So the comments that have been mentioned earlier about Darren Hurst and Amber Valley having concerns about the site were made based on the applied geology report in advance of our involvement with the project. Within the correspondence, Darren's response, the council highlighted the possible potential for dioxins and furans to be present at the site, as well as the potential for radioactive substances. Again, that was generally based on a submission by members of the public. So to address an earlier question, these potential contaminants have therefore been assessed as part of our intrusive works with the agreement of Amber Valley Borough Council. After undertaking the data review, we prepared a copy of our quotation for our client, and we provided a redacted, basically removed the price, but we included all the scope of the works and the schedule of works, and we forwarded that to Amber Valley Borough Council in advance of mobilisation to site to make sure that the works that we were looking at undertaking were satisfactory. We supplied that quote on the 3rd of December 2014, and we received a response from Amber Valley on the 5th of December 2014 from Darren Hurst stating, "I can confirm that I have no objections to your proposals and I'm satisfied with your precautionary approach. I'd be happy to receive the results of the works in due course." So we did, in advance of the work that we undertook, liaise with Amber Valley Borough Council to quite a high level. And I personally was there for a day going through the data rooms with Amber Valley, and Ian was there at the initial start. So on the basis of our data review, there are a lot of potential concerns that were highlighted, mainly dioxins and furans